Today's program, we're privileged to have the company of Tim Costello, Dr. Tim Costello, in fact, on Make Life Beautiful. Welcome to the show, Tim Costello.
Great to be with you.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to Make Life Beautiful. My name's Krista, and we have met 14 years ago when we were addressing...
Well, I had hair.
the Opportunity International dinner. Now, Tim, you have an honorary doctorate?
I do.
But before that, you were also named Victorian of the Year and Australian of the Year, and you studied law and education at Monash, and theology in Switzerland, and a master's in Melbourne, and you have an Order of Australia in AO.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot. My life actually is just one, well, I might say carelessly stumble after another. I didn't go seeking honours, and when they're awarded, genuinely surprised and humbled. And I think that's true for a lot of Australians, often not rewarded, not noticed, but equally doing things that are significant, that live consequentially with their values and their deepest wishes to do the right thing by themselves, the neighbourhood, the world. So I don't think I'm any different to a lot of Aussies.
However, you are an AO and your brother Peter is an AC. You both went to Monash, you both studied law. You went down the education and theology path, and Peter went down to the arts law and then politics path. Now, he also has achieved great heights in terms of influence, and was the treasurer for the Howard government for so many years. And then in 2008, he was invited to be the chairman, or appointed as the chairman, for the World Bank's new independent advisory board to provide advice on anti-corruption measures. It makes me wonder, you have chosen a Christ-centred church-based path, which has led you now to be the CEO of World Vision. So two boys growing up in the same home with the same parents, and your parents are Christians. What sort of influence or role have they played in both of you escalating to such great heights of influence?
Yeah, look, my mother once took me aside and said, "We're just an ordinary family, Tim. We didn't expect to have sons that had profiles." So in some ways, I think it remains a bit of a mystery to them. But both my parents were teachers. The family home was a classroom. Family holidays in the car. We'd travel to Sydney or to Adelaide from Melbourne. That car was a classroom. And there was this sense of curiosity, of learning, of wonder. They were both great teachers. Dad in the private system, Mum in the state system, the public system. They had strong faith, so I often remark those Sunday lunches, which I thought were normal. For us, you'd go to church, you'd have a roast, and 2 or 3 hours later you'd still be discussing what was raised in the sermon and what was in the papers that week. I remember being surprised when a young friend of mine, I guess I would have been 10 or 11, said to me after one Sunday lunch, "Your family's weird." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, we just eat our dinner and we go and kick the footy or watch TV. You keep discussing, debating." So look, I think those things, which were just normal for us, really are a credit to my parents, who were both teachers and people of great Christian faith.
What does it mean to be a Christian? For people who are watching or listening and they're thinking, "Oh, I've heard about Christians, but I'm not really interested." What's the value in becoming a Christian? Why are you a Christian? What is a Christian?
The sheer moral integrity of Jesus, the sheer courage to actually take on the powers of his time, announcing there is another way. That's what the reign of God, the kingdom of God he preached was all about. That it starts with the change of heart individually. It's not just finger pointing and saying others have got it wrong. So that's why he used the word repent, turn around, change direction, live differently. So for me, being a Christian is taking seriously that other way, that reign of God. And I am very attracted to the person of Jesus. Now look, I think with the church, someone once said, Australians are very attracted to the product of the church, Jesus. They're not so sure about the retail outlet. And often the church, a very human, fallible institution, has got it wrong. But insofar as you ask what it means to be a Christian, for me it's to say, my life's not my own. I have a sense of calling that God has placed in my heart, and hopefully it's the change of heart that's guided my life, a way of seeing the world that's more about love, grace, about possibility, about this reign of God beginning that includes everyone. So for me, that's what being a Christian is.
In fact, here at the World Vision head office, you're right across the road from Crossway Baptist Church. How did that occur that you are a Baptist, you founded the St Kilda Baptist Church, you were a senior minister in the city, you were the chair, I think, for an outreach for people off the streets, Urban Seed. And so this Baptist theme is very strong for you. Is it an accident you're right next to Crossway Baptist, or did you plan it that way?
Yeah, so Crossway Baptist is a very large Baptist church, perhaps the largest, if not in Australia, certainly Victoria. It actually started as Blackburn Baptist in my parents' home. And
this church started in your parents' home.
And a few other homes. And back in the early 50s, so there's been a long association. That's the church where I got baptised, Peter got baptised. Look, the coincidence of World Vision and me now being at World Vision and Crossway being next to each other wasn't my doing, but it is a lovely circle, and certainly the vibrancy of faith there is very important for me, and it's very important for World Vision. We employ people around the world who are Hindu and Muslim, though we're a Christian organisation. We are engined and powered by that Christian vision I was talking about.
Some people worry about giving to charity. They fear that their money's not going to get to where the advertising says it will go. So how do we know how much money goes to the children that we're sponsoring? Yeah. You've got a big facility here, many hundreds of staff. Obviously, you've got to have marketing, you've got to have administration. How much actually gets to the on-the-ground helping the children?
Yes, so for every dollar that you give in marketing and overheads, it's about 24 cents that is used to raise dollars. I wish we didn't have to market, but to actually keep the needs of people before Australians, you do. Now, how do you know? Because not only do we get audited, but out of the 7 years the PricewaterhouseCoopers have been doing transparency awards for all charities, those that function only in Australia and those that function outside Australia. We've won the Transparency Award twice in the last 7 years. We are very, very transparent and very committed to the money getting there and making a difference. In addition, there's regular charity watch lists, and if you have a look at those published in the Daily Telegraph and the Murdoch Press, you'll see World Vision right at the bottom in terms of overheads and costs. And it's interesting because sometimes you'll see our ads on TV, or you'll come to a building like this and say, well, it's big, so the money must not be getting there. There's almost a virus that gets out that says, oh, well, if you've had advertised on TV, that's where the money's gone. It hasn't gone to the kids. That virus is just wrong. Whether it's Charity Watch, whether it's the PricewaterhouseCoopers Transparency Awards, World Vision is right at the most efficient, the most effective, the greatest use of the dollar, and we're really proud about that.
That is fantastic news to hear, and comforting. So there you go, you can be assured that your dollar is getting where it needs to be. People who want to volunteer for World Vision, are there ways to help World Vision other than sponsoring a child, doing the 40-hour famine, being employed full-time or part-time? Are there ways to volunteer other than those? Yeah,
in our head office here, and certainly in our state offices around Australia, we welcome volunteers. So it's a matter of giving us a call. Now, sometimes people say, no, I want to go to Africa and dig wells. And we say, well, look, there are some limited opportunities, but they're very limited. Essentially, development is actually about empowering the locals. And you have to have a particular set of skills as a expat to empower locals. Wherever World Vision works, we're a local organisation. So in Ethiopia, where I've just come from, it's 1,000 Ethiopians. In Indonesia, it's 2,000 Indonesians. In East Timor, it's East Timorese. So whilst there are some limited volunteering opportunities, the sense of we know best, we have the skills, we'll come and do it for you is not a great development model. It's not lifting people to sustainability and giving them skills. Yep, there are some opportunities, but they're not always what you might romantically think. I'll just pack a bag and go and help Africans.
There are so many charities to get involved with. What drew you to World Vision?
Well, I did the 40-hour famine when it first began back in 1975. I was at Monash University, and I went off and starved for a weekend. I was playing footy and I was thinking this isn't a good idea. My brother Peter and another friend were running the World Vision stall back then at Monash University. We were both studying law. So that experience of denying myself food and the penny dropping, this is how people my age have to live. They have no choice. For us, in our bubble, there's always money in our wallet, there's always Macca's, food in the fridge.
The Bank of Dad.
Absolutely, there's always the Bank of Dad. To think that you didn't have those options, I think greatly expanded my empathy. So I was a World Vision supporter and donor thereafter. And I worked as a lawyer. I ended up Mayor of St Kilda. I started Urban Seed and worked as a Baptist minister. So it was 10 years ago that I was approached to be the CEO of World Vision. I'd had a long history of supporting World Vision. Was delighted that they would consider me because I thought, you know, I'm not a development expert. But now I've been here 10 years, and the moral seriousness of this work, of giving people hope, of dealing with that panic parents have when they can't provide enough calories for their children or clean water, and the failure they feel, any parent would feel, and World Vision walking alongside and giving them sustainable solutions. That moral seriousness, that moral joy has been really important to me.
But that's part of the theme of your life. You're recognised as an advocate for all streams of disadvantage, from people living on the street to drug abuse and gambling and poverty and the whole thing. So you very much, even way back to St Kilda, you've even written books, and one's called Hope and the other one was you've authored several books including Streets of Hope, Finding God in St Kilda, and other titles as well. Your most recent book is Hope, and then you've also got another one called Another Way to Love. So just talking about the St Kilda experience, St Kilda, for the viewers and listeners, is like the red light district in Sydney is King's Cross. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so what year did you actually bury yourself and found the church in St Kilda?
Yeah, so there was a little church that had been there for 100 years, but it was down to 8 or 9 members. And I came back from Switzerland, where I was studying theology in 1984, and began ministry in St Kilda. With 8 or 9 people, elderly people. They couldn't pay me, of course, as a minister. I set up a branch of the legal firm that I'd been working with. I ran, as a business, a legal firm which was really for, well, it ended up sex workers and people with mental illness, people who were poor and on the fringe, so it was legal aid work, and worked as a minister. And St Kilda then was certainly the catchment area for drugs, for those with mental illness, for sex workers. Still the only place in Victoria with street prostitution. Of course, since that time, St Kilda's been discovered by those with money, 4 kilometres from the CBD, facing the bay, and literally people said, why did we leave this to the riffraff? And there's been a gentrification, a change in St Kilda. But in my years there, they were very raw streets and broken lives, and that's who my ministry, both as a lawyer and as a Baptist minister, the church grew, the legal practice grew. I ended up Mayor of St Kilda. They were very telling years, significant years, and that's why I wrote that book, Streets of Hope, Finding God in St Kilda. So it wasn't simply, this is all bad and shadow and black. There's hope here and there's transformation happening.
At the end of your time with that church, how many members did you have?
We had about 200 by the end.
So from 8 to 200?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And the membership was mostly people from the street?
It was a mixture. People from the street, people who were young, middle class who had moved in. So we had a mixture. We set up a street church called the House of Hope. That's that word again. Which was a church where you could smoke through the service, because a whole lot of people would come to church. They couldn't get through without a smoke. So we said, okay, it's far better there in church. And so we were feeding people in the House of Hope. It was a ministry in St Kilda. So we had a couple of different church fronts happening.
Do you think the parishioners who were the middle class and non-street people, non-people who are disadvantaged, saw it as a ministry to be involved with your church?
Yeah, many of them did. But look, this is the curious thing when you think, I've got my life together, I'm helping someone else. Sometimes you discover those people who are the needy help you, minister to you, change you. So the church was much more integrated than, one set of religious social workers helping the down and out. They were actually relating like this in terms of being one community.
I guess on the streets of St Kilda in those days, the people who were there, living there, and the raw hardness of life were just expressing the human cry to be loved. Everyone just wants to be loved. And doesn't matter what section of society we come from, we still get it wrong. Doesn't matter how rich or poor.
Absolutely. Look, the most fundamental question any human has is, do I matter? Do I matter to anyone else? The Christian faith is simply saying you matter. God knows you. He created you. You are loved. And the Christian church is meant to be an expression of that love, that grace. In experiencing love and grace, there is the expectation that this brings about an internal transformation that actually helps you love and live responsibly and give, and not just be a person who receives. That's the transformation that I think is very hopeful. It's not just staying a victim, an object of pity, because there's no real respect in that. So that was very much our ministry in St Kilda. It started with grace. It wasn't starting with, if you clean up, then we will love you. I would often say, interesting that in the Gospels, probably Jesus and the disciples were on the nose. Their hygiene wouldn't have been great. No ream hot water systems in first century Palestine.
Fishermen, carpenters.
Jesus had not the middle class aspirations. There's nothing wrong with being middle class. I'm middle class. To own a home. He never owned a house. The sense of being a futurist that we middle class have, that I'm saving up for a trip, I'm being responsible. Well, Jesus lived out of a common purse with his disciples and gave it away to those in need. And so that sense that we, whatever our middle class or working class or street backgrounds, these things don't define whether you're a Christian. It's actually your openness to God. That's the defining thing. Whatever the cultural class sorts of overlays that we think, oh, a real Christian looks like me, and acting responsibly and saving for a house deposit and travel. We had very interesting times thinking through what it means to actually love, accept, embrace the gospel, rather than simply do a classic sort of pity class type ministry.
Talking about love at another angle, you love your work. You are in St Kilda practicing law, running a church, and be the mayor, and be the dad of now 3 children, Claire, Elliot and Martin, and the husband of Meredy. How does anybody put all of that together and come up smiling? And today you've come from meeting to meeting and you're going to another meeting and it's very finely timed. How do you cope? What do you do?
Yeah, look, certainly.
This is 2 questions. How do you be a good dad, father, in the context of the busy life?
Yeah, look, one of the questions I'll ask the Lord when I get to heaven is, why did he structure life in a way that you're really hitting your straps right at the time your kids need you most, when they're little? It was difficult. When I was Mayor of St Kilda, my kids were still in primary school. Most committee meetings and council meetings were at 6 o'clock at night. I pay huge tribute to my wife. She held, you know, the family together with the kids getting little bits of me. Thankfully, the kids are all terrific and working out their own lives. Elliot has started a charity himself that he works full-time for. They work in Africa, Cambodia.
What's the name of that charity?
YGAP, Youth Generation Against Poverty. So he's started a restaurant in Richmond, that Feast of Merit, that sees the proceeds all go to YGAP. There was a coffee shop in Burke Street called Kinfolk. He has a 5-cent campaign where you collect 5 cents. Elliot and Claire both have worked with him in that. So look, they have ended up doing very similar things to me. But unreserved, unequivocal credit to my wife. I think I was a good father in the patches that I was there, but as you rightly said, my life was busy, and I was hitting my straps at that time when, you know, your kids need you most. And it's one of, I think, the great challenges in life, how you balance being an absolutely responsible parent, because family is the basic unit of society. It is the glue that holds us together, whilst also following your calling. And there's endless reflection and books about how you just try and get that right.
In terms of when the kids hit teenage years, what's one piece of great advice that you might like to give?
When the kids hit teenage years, realise that they often won't do what you tell them, but if your values are consistent, they'll end up doing what you do. And that was certainly true for my kids. You know, we had lots of moments, wild rides, you know, with our kids who'd grown up in St Kilda. And there were moments of sitting outside principals' offices and where I would feel humiliated. You know, they weren't necessarily humiliated. And you'd go, have I really mucked up? And, you know, am I a failure as a father? The wonderful thing is that if your values are clear and your love constant, kids end up coming through that. And as I've said, they end up, in my case, doing what I do.
Tell me, from the St Kilda days again, I was fascinated, tell me one story that sticks in your mind of a life that was changed as a result of your presence in that community.
Yeah, there were lots of stories of lives that were changed.
One in particular.
Maybe the story of the first sex worker I represented, who had been shooting up behind her eye and had this huge black eye. And I kept her out of prison. We got her some emergency accommodation. Took some years, but she finally got off heroin, and now is living a very purposeful, fulfilled life. Her story was a story that was remarkable. There are lots of people who you work with and they did well and they slipped back. There's a lot of those stories too, but sometimes you see people who really escape the clutches of how they have been living.
Isn't it true that when we find a purpose for our life, when we figure out why we're here, that creates energy as well? Absolutely.
You know, the primary question I think that we have to answer is, what am I meant to do? If I'm here for a reason, because I believe it's that God made us, then what am I meant to do? And I often say to people, ask yourself the question, what is it that if I don't do it, the world's going to be poorer and I'm going to be poorer? And you need to answer that question. And it might be your volunteering, it might be your parenting, it might be a range of things, your coaching, it might be just the generosity you show to some neighbours, but something that you need to do. if you're not going to be poorer and the world's not going to be poorer. And that purpose, I think, is really important.
Well, here at Make Life Beautiful, the purpose is exploring how fitness, fine art and volunteering can enhance your well-being, but also the well-being of those you love and you care about, including your community. In terms of how you cope, going back to that question, what do you do with food, exercise, sleep? How much do you sleep?
Oh no, I need, well, I try to get 8 hours. I don't always get it. Look, I take exercise seriously. I, until last year, was playing veterans Aussie rules football. We'd only play every 2 weeks because it took us 2 weeks to recover. We were so sore and knocked about. I regularly play tennis. I cycle a bit. So I think fitness is absolutely critical in my life. The hours I end up working, fitness is fundamental to keep me going.
How many hours a week would you dedicate to exercise?
Oh, it would probably be 2 or 3 hours a week. It's, 20 minutes sort of a day, a bit of cycling. If I can get in a game of tennis, that would be, works out probably once every couple of weeks.
And do you exercise solo or with Meredy or with mates?
Yeah, usually solo. Look, I've taken up with my daughter, who's living at home, walking just half an hour a day. Michael Moore, the rather overweight film producer in America, put out a challenge to Americans to walk half an hour a day, and he's got apparently 1 million Americans now doing this.
Marvellous.
So, and that's good relationship time too, so that's quite nice. So look, I take fitness seriously. Look, on eating, it's interesting.
I was going to say food next.
I've been
travelling the world, all those delicacies that you would encounter.
Well, you do. Well, often they're not delicacies. I'm not going to Paris. I'm going to the belly of the beast. But I watched that documentary on the 5-2 diet, and it wasn't something I wanted to do for weight. I'm not worried about that. But it actually said that when you fast 2 days a week, there is a chance for the cells to repair. And I thought, gee, that's interesting. And it had some scientific backing to it. I'm no food scientist. So look, I've been doing that for the last 3 months. I quite like it. The discipline of not eating 2 days a week, I find good. I actually find good.
Is it 500 calories fast, or there's nothing at all that you do?
Yeah, no, well, often it's nothing because I just don't get around to it. But no, it's that one where I think men can eat 600 calories.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what you aim to do, 600, or sometimes you have a complete fast?
Often just because I'm moving fast. Yesterday I'd been in Canberra and back, and I didn't eat at all. But I find that keeps me alert. Whether it's sustainable or not, I don't know, but it's been a good discipline for me.
Radio Northern Beaches in Sydney is a community radio station. You are also the chair of the Community Council of Australia. A former guest on our show was Stephen O'Doherty, an MP in the New South Wales Parliament, and he's an absolute advocate for community radio. How do you think community radio, community television can assist you in helping you reach your goals for this organisation, the Community Council of Australia?
Yeah, Community Council for Australia is a new peak body for charities. So what you discovered was that you had peak bodies just for particular slices of the charitable world, so RSPCA and animals, and they related to the Minister for Agriculture. You had Mission Australia and Smith Family that would relate to the Minister for Community Services. You had World Vision and the Oxfams that related to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. So we're very fragmented, yet the charities area is actually huge. It's $100 billion a year. The charities area is second in employment only after retail. And we had no one voice that actually would be able to submit to government, whether it's having a productivity commission inquiry. There's a view of the not-for-profit sector. So we formed Community Council for Australia to say, let's express that view. Let's have a voice. You
formed it, you say we, but did you form it?
Oh, well, I with others, a couple of others. I've been the foundational chair and still chair of it. So community radio, TV, is exactly in that zone. It's there's sort of three spheres broadly of life. There's government, and that's, you know, a really big player. Government takes 35% of GDP in tax, and so that's a major driver of our lives and services. There's for-profit, and that's really important for creating jobs and obviously creating wealth and dividends. And then there's what we call not-for-profit. Now, not-for-profit I prefer to call for purpose. I don't see why we define ourselves negatively. We're the purpose sector. We're there, whether it's Surf Lifesaving or RSPCA or World Vision, we're there for the purpose of care and a better world. So that third sector, I think community radio, which is encouraging relationship, network, vision, passion, energy zones that aren't for-profit and aren't government, is a really natural partner. So I just hope that what we're trying to do in Community Council for Australia gets a run on community radio, since we are the same sector.
Well, indeed, Stephen O'Doherty was saying that what he loves about community radio is the democraticness of it, that people can say pretty much what they want to say within the licensing that they have for their particular station, and it's different to the commercial stations, different to
Look, I think that I would put it differently. I would say community radio gives voice to people in a way about local issues and about everyday issues that often you don't get in commercial radio, that are always looking for a polarised account and a political angle and a cultural war, you know, left versus right, sort of balance. A lot of us in the community are tired of that sort of discussion, and community radio that's about authentic, often grassroots, genuine interest that doesn't have to be fitted into some spectrum of left or right, and equal time, I think is just very refreshing.
What's prompted your particular interest in helping people get out of gambling?
I, in my legal practice, was approached by a woman who had owned 2 houses and her own business and had a good marriage and had no addictions, wasn't a drinker or a smoker. And when pokies were introduced into Victoria in 1992, suddenly found herself surprisingly addicted, one just around from home. She not only lost her houses and business, thankfully not her marriage, her husband stuck by her, but she started stealing from work, and I represented her. She then had stolen $60,000 to feed her pokey addiction, and she was put into prison for 4 years, a huge term that you would never get today. And I was so outraged that pokies had been introduced here without any consumer warnings, without any sense of the addictive nature of it, making criminals out of people who were otherwise very law-abiding citizens. And that passion is still with me. I'm shocked that in New South Wales you've got 10% of all the world's pokies. 10%.
Wow.
And
not per capita, of all the world?
Of all the world. Not per capita, of all the world.
10% of the entire world's poker machines are in New South Wales?
Yeah. And that figure comes from the Productivity Commission in 1999, who found that Australia had 21% of all the world's poker machines. You'll exclude pachinko's, toy-giving machines in Japan, but what we know as poker machines, slot machines, 21% were in Australia, 10% in New South Wales. Now, how did that happen? That happened because of a complete failure by state government. Governments that should protect the vulnerable said, wow, there's so much money for us to make from taxing pokies. They threw licences out everywhere. So it was under Bob Carr that suddenly hotels, not just clubs, got pokies, and they spread everywhere. The devastation and the impact and the addiction is quite disastrous. It is one of the greatest failures of public policy, state government public policy, in a predatory way. The state literally sponsoring pokies and seeing damage done to its own citizens. For me, I got involved not just through that client, but when I watched Jeff Kennett, Premier of Victoria, open Crown Casino, and he said, "This represents the new spirit of Victoria. This is a beacon of hope." I thought, spirit, hope, these are our words. And he's applying this to a casino, which will trash people's dreams. Something's badly wrong when state premiers are spruiking gambling. We have lost our bearings. So that's been an interest, and I still chair the National Church's Gambling Task Force, trying to make some progress on that issue.
How much has your formal education, compared to your rolled up sleeves, getting your hands dirty, doing the business by experience, contributed to your level of influence, where you have an Order of Australia, you're a world-known speaker?
Yeah, formal education is very important. It gives you the categories, but there's very little I can remember from my university days. I realised when I started my legal career that I was an article clerk, that the secretaries knew far more about the law than I did. They were the ones who really, I might know some High Court decisions, but they knew actually how to write an affidavit and how to go about managing a client. And I learnt more from the legal secretaries in some ways than I did from my 5 years of law degree. So look, it's always a mixture of rolling up your sleeves and learning by doing, with some categories that I think formal education gives you that are important for asking the right question, for seeing a different perspective. Both are important, and people do learn in different ways, particularly adults. And you've got to find the way you learn best and give that priority, because it's not necessarily the same way as your neighbour.
Do you think you're both parents, being in the education system as teachers themselves, one private, one in the public sector? Obviously you would be thinking, oh, I must be educated because my parents are educators. Would that be the case? Or can people be successful without having to go to university per se?
Yeah, but look, in my father's case, it was the war that gave him the opportunity. He had to leave school in the Depression years. He was bright, but he would have had no opportunity. His life was going to be in a factory. And he fought in New Guinea in the war, and there was a scheme for returned soldiers to be able to finish their education and go to university. That was his break. There he met my mother, who was in some ways ahead of her time. I didn't have many friends both of whose parents had a degree. So in some ways we were unusual, and education was valued. And I would never underrate that. Look, I think the most important thing is our parents, my siblings, our parents had curiosity and asked why, and encouraged discussion and thinking and testing and drilling down. And you don't need formal education necessarily to be that sort of person, but if you are that sort of person, you'll probably end up in formal education, because those questions will drive you there.
So formal education sets up scenarios where you can actually explore the big questions of life, or explore the questions of your purpose and the skill that you're studying at the time, in the context of adults being there, your peers being there. You can have the old mind and the young mind.
Yeah, people who teach you at university, their really great advantage is they've read a few more books than you. So they can point you to some classics, save you some time, help pose the questions that really are the architecture for why society is the way it is, why it's working this way, and where change might come from. So that's the advantage of teachers at university, if you get good teachers.
And talking about the lecturers having read more books than the students, to finish the interview I'd like to sum up with a synopsis of your current book, which is Hope.
It's stories through my experiences meeting people around the world who have given me hope. And it is very personal. It's meant to be very accessible, so students, as well as people who don't see themselves as great readers, can actually go, oh, that insight I get, and that's helpful for me, and I can find hope through things that happen to me in daily encounters. For me, it's written also from the perspective of faith, that there is purpose in the world. The great Christian story of creation, of fall, of redemption, meaning that we can be restored, and that we have a part and a purpose to play in God's plan is also behind that book and the stories I tell.
Thank you, Tim Costello, for being part of Make Life Beautiful.
A pleasure.